I work at a marketing company alongside my husband, whom I also met through our training program. We tied the knot 2 years ago. We both value our independence and personal space, so we maintain a healthy distance at work. When it comes to household chores and finances, we share the responsibilities equally. Keith had been living on his own since he started working, and I appreciate that he's more adept at handling household tasks than I am. Our marriage has been harmonious, except for one recurring issue. Keith's mother, Lisa, always greeted us warmly and prepared an array of homemade dishes whenever we visited his parents, who lived about an hour's drive away. On one particular occasion, Lisa prepared a feast centered entirely around mushrooms: shiitake mushrooms stuffed with meat, king trumpet mushrooms with cheese, salted oyster mushrooms, and more. It was an impressive spread of mushroom-based dishes. She happily exclaimed her excitement, leaving Keith and me bewildered by her enthusiasm. However, I had previously mentioned to her that I didn't particularly enjoy eating mushrooms. In other words, these dishes felt like deliberate provocations directed at me. It all started during our first visit after getting married. Lisa had called me before our arrival and asked if there was anything I didn't eat or disliked. Without any suspicion, I truthfully mentioned that I wasn't fond of scallops. To my surprise, she had prepared scallop gratin and salted scallops, even serving scallop pasta for lunch the next day. It seemed that Keith had informed his mother about my dislike for scallops. When confronted, Lisa feigned ignorance, claiming that she hadn't known about my preferences. Annoyed but assuming it was a forgetful mistake, I let it slide. Right before our subsequent visit, she called once again to inquire about my food preferences. This time, I childishly shared my distaste for the bitter taste of green bell peppers and Brussels sprouts. As expected, she served these disliked foods in abundance throughout our stay. It was at that moment I realized she was intentionally doing it. She harbored genuine dislike towards me, and it hurt more than it angered me. Keith also noticed the precision with which she served me the foods I disliked, not once but twice. He remained silent during those instances but apologized to me in the car on our way back home. His dejected demeanor made him appear small and saddened. I began to question whether I had done something to earn her hatred. "No, you didn't do anything wrong," Keith assured me. We both agreed that I had taken her words at face value and hadn't offered to help with the cooking. Maybe I should have taken the initiative to cook. "No, I don't think so," he firmly replied, and I wholeheartedly agreed. The truth was, my culinary skills were lacking. Keith even took it upon himself to be in charge of cooking at home. However, there was another predicament. Lisa's cooking was exceptional from the very first time she served me scallop gratin. I felt it would be impolite not to take a bite. Summoning my courage, I cautiously tasted it and was taken aback by its deliciousness. It had a unique flavor unlike anything I had ever experienced. The sea-like aroma, which I usually disliked, was absent, and the texture of the scallops combined with the creamy cheese was a perfect match. Even the green bell peppers and Brussels sprouts, prepared skillfully, offered a delightful touch of mild bitterness that beautifully enhanced the dish. I complimented the food and expressed my appreciation. Lisa's dumbfounded expression left a lasting impression on me. This was also the reason why Keith couldn't be angry with her, because I ate everything she served. Despite these peculiarities, I continue to dedicate myself to my work at the marketing company. Keith and I maintain our respectful distance while managing our shared responsibilities at home. And as for Lisa's culinary choices, I've come to realize that sometimes even unexpected dishes can surprise and delight us. I enjoyed the food that was supposed to be unsavory to me. It was my third visit. I devoured a mushroom dish with GTO thanks to Alyssa's harassment. My dislikes were decreasing since I was introduced to her cooking. I realized that the reason I've been picky was that I grew up in a family that didn't care much about the food. Oh, I had no idea mushrooms would taste that good. I've been missing out on so much in my life. I rubbed my stomach in satisfaction next to Keith, who slapped his forehead. What would be Mom's true intention if you enjoyed her harassment? She's a good cook, so maybe she has some pride. I don't get it. Frankly, I'm more concerned about your dad and brother's attitude than your mother's harassment. I guess you're right. This son lived with their husband David, who retired a few years ago, and another son, Kyle, who was single. Her direct harassment was the least of my worries, but I was more annoyed with Kyle, who washed me with a smirk. Perhaps he knew that she was entertaining me with something I disliked. When I ate a food with relish, she looked puzzled. But he showed obvious dissatisfaction. He even watched my every move with unpleasant attention, and if I made a slight less mistake, he would make sex. His remarks, on the other hand, David thought that was a servant, a housekeeper or something, and order me around with the snap of his fingers. Keith shielded me, but I still felt degraded. You know, we shouldn't visit him anymore. I was taking advantage of your generosity, but there's something wrong with my family. He murmured after the visit, I guess you're right, no matter how good the food was, it didn't change the fact that lesser was her resume. I was also fed up with the male chauvinism of David and Kyle. However, if I just pretended that it had never happened, I would be left annoyed. I had an idea of how to get back to them. Okay, can we have the final visit on yours day? Here's something I would love to do to them. When I shared my idea with him, he seemed a little reluctant, but he agreed to go along with it. Lisa disliked me for some reason and only put things on the table I didn't like. Maybe it was going to be the last time we saw each other. I hoped she would take my paycheck to her heart. Then came the final visit, probably the last New Year's Day to be celebrated at my in-laws' house. On the dining table there was a sumptuous dinner made by Lisa with a plate of 4 great work steaks. It was a divine sight that I had never seen at my parents' house. Normally I would be very excited, but Keith and I were anxious. I had told Alyssa in advance that I wasn't a big fan of high-grade weave and preferred pork glowing. She was suing my reaction with a smile on her face, and Kyle was smirking as usual. David was indifferent and demanding. Why from Lisa? These were the usual behaviors of in-laws. It was a very awkward scene. I ate the salad first, quietly, then I started on the stick. Then carefully prepare ingredients and tender meat. We're just heavily, oh, you're cooking just perfect, Lisa. A compliment came from the bottom of my heart. Oh, thank you. Lizard had a confused look on her face, almost speaking over her. Kaya opened his mouth with a nasty smile. By the way, why are we having such an extravagant dinner? Is there something special to celebrate with expensive beef? Well, Les mumbled. Ugh, while the rotten character he was, today is a very special day. Ride. Huh? I put a box I had secretly brought in front of her. I opened it and showed her what was inside. It was a whole cake. Keith and I put party poppers. We had hidden happy birthday, Alyssa. Oh my God. The dry sound of explosions was followed by confetti and gunpowder. The eyes were so big in confusion, and David and Kyle were on with a big smile on my face. I explained to them, your birthday is January 1st, isn't it? He's told me you like that, but David and Kyle usually get the most and only give you leftovers. Well, she gave Keith and me a STA look. He looked back at her and said, you always entertain us on New Year's date, and we never celebrated your birthday since I was a child. You never said anything about it either. I had totally forgotten about your birthday for so long. I'm sorry. Been married to Sally has made me realize a lot of things. She seemed to be tearing up at his heartfelt apology in the midst of all. Kyle clicked his tongue in his annoyance. What's this? You are scoring points, aren't you? That's why I don't like women. You are old. Calculating. He shook his head in disgust. And I glared at him with, oh my mind. I'm glad to be a calculating woman. I'm much better than a 34-year-old and a 65-year-old man who do nothing. And pastor, all year round what the, he was so stunned to be taught back to by me that he'd lost his words. His face was bright red with his mouth open, even David, who was staring blankly at whole cake, was furious at my rebellious attitude. Keith, shut your wife up. You haven't trained her well enough. She doesn't know her position in this house. Keith yelled back to him, you shut your mouth. You. Who do you think you are, ignoring her brow? I spoke to Lisa. How does it feel to be congratulated by someone you were harassing? Excuse me. Her face quickly turned pale as if I were telling a child. I spoke to her softly and without hesitation. Did you enjoy doing it? Well? Listen. Are you happy taking care of a son who thinks that celebrating his mother's birthday is nothing more than scoring points? Are you willing to spend the rest of your life taking care of these men? Don't you envy that? I'm loved and treated well by Keith. She was at a loss for words. I didn't know how she felt while harassing me. However, even if she didn't say it out loud, her kind nature was showing in her cooking. I would feel sorry if they tasted too bitter for her. Maybe she can eat a little of these mushrooms if they have the right texture. I'd feel bad if she couldn't eat anything that's prepared fried chicken too. I could sense kindness in her food. He that told me that his late grandmother lived there until a few years ago and that she had assumed control over the family. Lizard had been bullied by her and given the lowest rank. She spoiled only Kyle, the eldest son, and Keith was left out even after her passing. The treatment of Lisa within the family did not change. When Keith became acquainted with my family, he realized for the first time that something was wrong with his family. The root of all evil in his family was David and Kyle. Alyssa was their victim. Even though I knew this, I couldn't easily forgive her for her bad behavior toward me. Still, her cooking was filled with genuine kindness and was amazing, so I wanted to give her a last chance. Keith and I will never come to this house again. What? What are you saying? I was talking to Lisa, but David and Kyle, John Dean, who do you think you are? You don't have the right to decide. That's right. A stupid emotional woman has no right to speak. Shut up. When normally calm Keith yelled like an erupting volcano. Kyle flinched, using him as a shield. I suggested to Lisa, if you want to see Keith and me and your future grandchild, please think about what you should do. Please think about what you want to do with these selfish men for yourself. For myself, she mumbled and looked to heaven. Don't take this black-hearted woman's word. Her goal is to break us apart. Kyle yelled at her, but she kept silent with her eyes fixed on the birthday cake for the first time in decades. It was prepared for her. Keith and Lai left the house at a point. As we were getting into the car, David followed and cursed us. But we ignored him and drove away. There was nothing more I could do. It was up to Lisa. 3 months later, N.A. left her house and came to mind. She apologized to meet on her knees at the doorstep. I rushed to stop her, but she repeatedly apologized with tears rounding down her cheeks. She was brainwashed by her late mother-in-law that was supposed to serve her family, and that women were lower than men even after her passing. LSAT had been living under the spell for a long time. When she saw Keith and I happily sharing housework, she looked at us with amazement and jealousy. It was Kyle who took advantage of her feelings and told her to discipline me by bullying. There was a role of the modern law after being booted herself. She believed that it was a normal thing for a mother-in-law to do. She was well brought up and was not used to being nasty to people. Thought serving what I disliked was the best she could do. However, I praised her cooking and happily gobbled everything. She felt miserable being mean to such a good daughter-in-law, but she still couldn't stop herself after our last visit. She felt emotionally drained and shut herself up in her room. except for doing the bare minimum of housework. Kyle and David complained about her lazy cooking and apparently had a great time bitching about Keith and me as she watched her disgrace for family and thought back on my last words to her. Dispel gradually melted away. She did not want to waste the rest of her life. For those who didn't treat her as a human being, I could fear her suffocating pain. I almost blurted out that she should have lived with us, but Keith gently stopped me. Instead, we found her an apartment of 15 minutes walk from our house. By the way, when she announced that she was leaving, David pleaded and yelled in panic. On the other hand, Kyle completely underestimated the resilience of an elderly woman who had never worked before. He believed there was no way she and Sally would get along, so David was swayed by his arrogant attitude and kicked her out of the house. It seemed true that no company would be willing to hire a woman in her late 60s with no work experience. Little did they know, she had some passive income from an apartment and parking lot business she inherited from her late father. Living a modest life, she had no financial worries whatsoever. Gambling or squandering money had never crossed her mind. Ironically, it was more concerning for Kyle, who had never paid a cent for his living expenses at home, and for David, who had retired and relied on his savings and pensions. They depended on her for both chores and finances, never considering what would happen once she was gone. Initially, they attempted to continue their comfortable lifestyle by eating out, relying on prepared meals, and hiring housekeeping services. However, such a life was unsustainable. 3 months later, David received a call from the bank, notifying him that his account was overdrawn. It finally dawned on him that there was no balance left. Moreover, due to poor dietary choices, Kyle had gained a significant amount of weight, while David's excessive consumption of salt and alcohol had taken a toll on his health. It came as a shock to David, as he had always prided himself on his good health. They must have finally realized that it was Liza who had kept their family life peaceful. 5 months after Liza moved out, they became impatient, realizing she showed no signs of returning. They reached out to her, demanding her to come back. However, she had awakened from her previous situation and the conformity of living alone. She had no intention of returning to her old life. Instead, Keith visited them with a lawyer, initiating divorce proceedings. They resisted every step of the way, but without the financial means to hire a lawyer, they eventually succumbed. Melissa was eventually set free from the need for a new housekeeper. Kyle desperately searched for a wife, but no sensible woman would come near their filthy house. Unable to lower their standard of living, they continued to live amidst their father's garbage. They eventually went bankrupt, and the house was sold, leaving them in a small apartment, working regular day jobs. They still held on to the hope that Lisa would witness their devastation, feel responsible, and apologize to them. They never showed any love or appreciation towards her, only expecting to receive her unconditional love. However, on New Year's Day, 4 years later, a change was evident. "Happy birthday, Nana," her almost 3-year-old grandson said as he handed her a crayon sketch. Lisa smiled happily, treasuring the gift. Keith, who now manned the grill, had a sparkle in his eyes. "Mom, it's a nice piece of meat. Eat it while it's still hot." How wonderful it all was. Keith and Lisa had come to know each other so well that they even went on day trips together. Keith's skills in the kitchen were steadily growing as he learned to cook from Lisa on his days off. Her love and affection were showered upon her son and grandson. Lisa found deep satisfaction in enjoying delicious meals while seeing the contentment on their faces. It no longer mattered who did the cooking, mother-in-law or daughter-in-law, man or woman. The heart appreciates and enjoys the food prepared with love. A dining table shared with those loving hearts at the center of a home is truly the happiest thing in the world.